everybody. Welcome. I was hearing some laughter, hopefully in response to what are some of the weird things Christians have done. I'd love to be a fly on the wall, is that the expression? With some of those conversations and hear some of the things you've all shared. Welcome again, my name's Chris. If you're new, thanks for being with us and hanging. It's week 2 of the conversation, White Christian. Before we get into it, can we just give another round of applause for the finance team? I've sat in a lot of presentations for finances. I've had to give a couple in church, and that was so refreshing and good. So thank you to our team and to our community for being who we are. So we're in this conversation, White Christian, and the hope, I think, is to provide space for us to deconstruct, but then reconstruct, to acknowledge the ways the religion of Christianity has been problematic, but then find what's still of value within it, find the life that's still there. And so we're asking the question, why should we still follow? Why should we still engage this tradition, this story, this reality? And 2 of the elements we've been using, just for fun, have been, fun and significant, have been kind of making fun of our own. So it's somewhat cathartic. As somebody who's steeped in Christian culture now, I see so many weird things we do. And if I don't let it out and laugh at it sometimes, it'll just make me angry. So that's part of the reason. And so the other thing we're going to be doing each week, which we did last week, Matt shared a poem about why, his response to the question, why Christian. Each week we're going to have a different person share a response to that question. So to start it this week, I thought we'd do the make fun of us first. And this week, as we were prepping a little bit, I was talking with Greg, who's the co-pastor and the worship leader up here, and we were talking about different things. And one of the things that came up was snake handling, and I started to research into that, and it just made me sad, to be honest. And the other one that came up through that was videos of televangelists hitting people with their jackets. My favorite video was when that was set to the song "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor." But here's what was happening. Actually, as much as it was funny, I was also like, I can't make fun of, these are people with sincere faith to a certain degree, and I'm sure there's things about my faith that look bizarre to others. And so I found myself having a split of yeah, we do a lot, but I can't get myself, I feel convicted about making fun of people, but the things I can make fun of. So last week I made fun of some Christian film, the movie Christian Mingle, a real movie with the subtitle, "She Went Looking for Romance and Found Him," capital H-I-M. And this week I thought I'd make fun of some Christian products. Has anybody ever been to a Bible store, Bible bookstore, or Christian? So for some of us, if that's normalized, it's no big deal. But for others of us, if you go into it without the exposure or being groomed into the culture, it is fascinating. And the first time I went in, I was like, yeah, there's going to be some Bibles, some books about Christian practice, some other things that would be helpful. But there's also a whole industry that's very profitable with paraphernalia that is just kind of gimmicky or something. And the first one I saw was Testaments. And anybody seen Testaments? You can't. I saw as I was going to the cashier's thing, and you can't really read the subtitle, but it says powerful refreshment, powerful message, or something like that. And then that got me thinking about the time somebody I knew had an action figure of Bible Man, which that's a real thing. There's a cartoon show. And that one's kind of bizarre to me because somebody thought, I get the sentiment, we want to make the Bible cool. And what's cool in culture? Superheroes and action figures. But it's so problematic for me in so many ways. You start thinking about it a little bit. It's well, why is the Bible a man? Right? Why isn't Bible man? Why can't it be Bible woman? Actually, some of the words for wisdom in the Bible are feminine words, right? I'm sure kids aren't parsing these Greek verb endings and doing etymology, but that's where my mind goes with it. It's just weird. I wonder if, you showed Jesus a Bible man action figure, and you tried to make the connection somewhere, hey, like 2,000 years from now, based on your words that people compiled into a book, there's going to be an action figure that's purple and holds the sword of the Spirit. It'd be so bizarre for Jesus, right? And so the irony, the final one that came up this week, anybody know what that is? You see that trending this week? That's the Jesus Nike shoe that is filled with holy water. Wow. This is not a joke. The irony to it, I'll explain it in a sec, is that it's actually a statement piece. This is a piece made by it's like a group of artists in Brooklyn, kind of mocking the idea of capitalism and religion and this synergy. Nonetheless, it's sold out for $3,000 a piece very quickly in a day. It's weird. Christians are weird. Why do we do weird stuff? I think everybody does weird stuff. We all have layers of culture. And again, what we're trying to do now is to peel back some of those things and try to get to the essence of what's underneath it all. Because even underneath Bible Man is the Bible and this rich text that somehow is mysteriously divine and points to something beyond that is meaningful for billions around the world. What's underneath it all? And can we sift through that together in a way that deconstructs the things that need to be deconstructed, but finds the life underneath it? I think a lot of us are in that space. In fact, I think that's part of like what Oak Life is in some ways, a space for that. So why would we still be Christian after Bible Man? Why would we still be a follower of Jesus in the midst of American Christianity's marriage to nationalism and its worshiping of a flag that often is a source of blood and oppression? Why is there something still there? That's the question that's framing this. We're going to talk about specifically why Jesus today. But before we do that, I thought we'd invite a friend up to hear their response to the question, why Christian? So would you welcome up Maeva? So could you first just introduce yourself, whatever you'd like to say, and then how you would answer the question, why Christian?
Hi everyone, I'm Maeva. I'm from Haiti. I live in Vallejo. I like long walks on the beach. When Scott brought this up to me, I actually went and prayed about it, like, okay, why Christian? How do I answer this question? And while I was just kind of meditating on that, the first thing that came to my mind was reframe the question, why do you follow me? And it was this awesome conversation I had with God this weekend. And I follow you because you've been constant. You've been this constant presence in my life, even before I could recognize who you are. And when I did start to recognize who you are, your presence became even more surreal. You're always with me. And it became this consistent thing that I was experiencing, like God chasing after me. And then it became this committed relationship that I can't let anyone take that away from me. And it made me realize I follow you because I love you and you love me.
That's beautiful. It might be all you need to hear today. So it actually connects well with some of the stuff I have for us to consider. I hope each of us asks this question. It's one of my favorite questions to ask Christians. Like, why do you still do it? For some of us, it might just be, well, it's just habit. Like, it's what I know, it's comfortable, it gives me purpose and meaning. And that's cool, that's beautiful. What a gift to have a story you find yourself in, that you makes you a better person, it makes you loving, it makes you consider things. For some of us, we've never actually asked that question. And my experience is that it's the fear of asking that question that ends up pushing people away, because there's some cognitive dissonance. The question's there, but they don't ever feel free to explore it. And so at some point, there's a break, and they leave. That's been my experience. I see that often. And on the converse, when we ask the question, my experience has been that God meets us there. When we ask the question, when we ask the big human questions, somehow there is this experience that we can't shake, a benevolence beyond that has been with us the whole time, that the Christian story calls God and is known through Jesus, and it's there. And so I hope you ask the question at some point during this series of yourself. Specifically today, why Jesus? What about this figure is important? Why do Christians follow Jesus? What's that all about? And so that's kind of the aim of today's conversation. Next week's going to be White Church, and then Pastor Leah from Haven is going to speak in a couple weeks. And so it's going to be fun as we explore this. But I think I have an outline. Here's roughly where I'm going. Why Jesus? There it is. I'm going to talk briefly about the historical Jesus, what Jesus is to me, kind of maybe my response, like Maeva just shared with us so beautifully, and then some questions. The last section is a bunch of different stuff, and I hope it threads together. But before we get into it, I thought we could read some words of Jesus and just allow these to speak. These are words that we've used lots of times here that have been comforting and hope to billions throughout the centuries, and words that I think are still speaking today. And maybe this is an answer to why Christian. When you hear these words, then we'll take a moment to respond communally if there's anybody who'd like to share how these words are speaking to them. This comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. It's Jesus speaking. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Matthew 11, 28 through 30. The words of Christ. Anybody like to share an impression of feeling how this has spoken to you currently, or how it's spoken to you in the past? These words. Anybody like to share a response? Yeah.
Well, when I first started reading the Bible, I don't know, 16 years ago, something like that, I was in my mid to late 20s, and I thought that, so I had some comprehension issues at the time, and reading issues, and I thought yoke was like an egg yolk. So I asked Kevin, like, how could that possibly be? And he's like, no, it's a different kind of yoke. And so the way I learned is I had to do some investigating, and when I realized what a yoke was, I was like, that is so, whoa, that thing is so heavy, like, and I had so much of that. I was like the ox with this big black thing on my back that I just couldn't carry anymore. So I was like, now that I know what that really means, and now that I see it, and I don't want it anymore. So it was so easy for me just to be like, yeah, take it, thank you.
It's beautiful. Maybe one or two more if there's anybody who'd like to share. Yeah.
Your recent conversations about nationalism and lining up with Christianity made me ask myself some hard questions. And looking at this, I'm initially reminded of that old poem that the Statue of Liberty. I don't know who wrote it or when it was written. Kind of like what America and what Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty kind of used to stand for, and kind of how far we are from that currently.
Cool, thank you. And one more if anybody would like to share. Yeah.
It makes me think of how, like, often I don't maybe recognize that I have like the yoke or yokes on until like I've been forgiven, or I like work through it, process it, and my body just feels lighter. It feels like the yoke's been taken off. But it's not until I like work through it that it actually I realize that I have that burden, that yoke on my shoulders.
Thank you. Give a round of applause for everyone who shared. And maybe this is an answer to the question for some of us, like why? Because Jesus offers us something that we've tangibly experienced. The yoke of our sin, our stress, our brokenness being lifted, and a light yoke, a yoke of love that's shared, that Jesus is carrying that weight with us. So maybe that's why Christian. That could be enough. Let's keep exploring this. What about historically? I think the historical piece is worth noting. I lean towards the mystical, the experience, but that's not to say that the rational, logic, historical, data-oriented piece of Christianity isn't also there. And so, why Christian? At the very least, we should acknowledge that Jesus is an incredible figure in history, an improbable figure, an unlikely figure, a controversial figure, a figure who I would argue has had an impact on the globe more than any other person. And it's incredibly unlikely because this person never wrote a book, never led a movement or held office, never commanded a military, wasn't buried somewhere where there's a monument to them, and was born into poverty, was born as a displaced person in refuge, seeking refuge in a foreign country, was born in the outpost of the empire in a rural, occupied context. And yet it's that person that most of the world, not all of it, but the majority of the world marks their years. It's that person who has fueled the largest, very problematic, yes, but largest religious movement in the world that's incredibly diverse. Incredibly diverse. In fact, I would argue that, it's kind of a side note, Christianity is more diverse than we like to think it is. We always want to say, my tribe has it, but if you hang out with Christians around the world, they'll worship very different than you, they'll experience it very different than you, and they're a part of this thing. Like that ripple from this person born in the ancient Near East has permeated the culture. Tragically, what's happened historically is the Western expression of Christianity, largely because the Western world had power for, and still does, has drowned out the more indigenous expressions of people who are encountering Jesus. A lot of scholars say that the indigenous African Christianity that was there was flourishing in Ethiopia and southern Egypt. And it wasn't until colonization that the European brand of Christianity was kind of stunted that growth. All that to be said is, at the very least historically, Jesus was a real person. Something happened in what is the Levant or Palestine and Israel. I think of a map of the region and the empire within the Roman Empire. Something happened that at the very least we should consider. We should ask the question, well, who is this person? And I specifically got this picture because it was done by the BBC, and it was a portrait based on what we know of the time and the culture in the region of Galilee where Jesus was from, what people would have looked like. And it's different than the Western white Jesus, right? This is somebody born in an improbable context who is documented not just within his tradition, but also non-Christian historical documents attest to, at the very least, this person existed. This is a picture of a book called Antiquities of the Jews, written by the Roman historian Josephus, who documents that Jesus existed, and his followers have all these claims, and they think that he's coming back. And so, maybe historically, why Christian? Well, there's also there's this encounter for a lot of us that Jesus is actually with us somewhere. That's why I can't shake it. But also, at the very least, I should consider this question because this is a massive historical person, and the impact can't be understated. So, why else? Well, I can share for me, and this is super intimidating to try to encapsulate Jesus in a 20, 30-minute talk or whatever. Because it's deeply personal, there's so many misconceptions, it's hard to capture in a few words. It's like I recently became a father, and I couldn't start to explain what it's like in a few words, but here are some words. I went from 40 different descriptors to 15. So for me, Jesus is historical. There's this encounter that a lot of us have that we can't shake, that is deeper than the religion. And some of those things for us could include these. And if you should not only ask the question, why Christian, but you should start asking other people that question. What do you see in Jesus? Because Jesus is a relational truth. It's not just a set of propositions. And so every person will know Jesus slightly differently. And that expression broadens and magnifies the power and the impact of Jesus. So maybe other people would have different words. And I would encourage you to write a list of what Jesus means to you, or how you see this figure, this story, this person, this reality. And so here are some things. For me, Jesus is love in a body, divine love in a body, is personified, embodied, incarnate divine love, redeeming our flesh, telling me that, we read this quote last week, that no, the body is sacred, and it's with us. Jesus is like a comforting parent. He used the words describing himself as a mother hen. Jesus has become the role model of all role models for me, like the ideal to live into, how to love your neighbor, how to treat yourself with dignity, how to practice sacrificial love. Jesus is a liberating revolutionary. He's not a good citizen. You don't get executed for being just a good citizen, which I think American Christianity wants to create, just good American people, be American and just have a family and all that nice stuff. Well, the person at the center of Christianity was executed by the police state, accused of terrorism. For me, Jesus is never settled. I mentioned it's a relational truth. This ongoing journey, it's always new, just like any relationship is. You always see new things to people as the years go by. A mentor of mine said his wife's been married to 5 different men, and they've all been him. Over the course of time, when you orient yourself around Jesus in a relational way, it grows and evolves, and there's new angles to this as you grow and change. It's not settled. Jesus is not a white guy, which to me, this is just me speaking, is important because it reminds me of my place in society and my identity in relationship to things and where God is and how I fit into all of that. Jesus is somebody who hangs with outsiders, always, like real outsiders that if I hung out with, a lot of Christians would be like, dude, what are you doing? You're a pastor, you can't be doing that. Drunks, lepers, prostitutes, Samaritans, tax collectors. Jesus is willing to risk safety and comfort for the sake of others. Jesus is mirrored in creation. For me, this is a weird one. I'll explain what I mean. For me, one of the answers to the why Christian question is because I can't stop seeing it everywhere. After hanging for a while, you start to see that everything reflects Jesus.
Yeah.
The death and resurrection of the seasons, life and death always being followed by new life, resurrection. I start to see it everywhere. Richard Rohr says that a Christian is not somebody who follows good morals, it's somebody who sees Jesus everywhere in everything. So I look around and it's like I look at a sunset and I feel like I know the author, the painter of that thing. It's like, well, this is you again, huh? Yeah, totally. I can't stop seeing it. Jesus is tender but fierce. Jesus is not a softie. He's tender and warm and welcoming, but fierce when it comes to injustice, flipping over tables of corruption. Jesus is in us. I see him in people all the time. Jesus is grace upon grace, always forgiving me, which I need all the time. Jesus is beyond politics, but also political. Kind of a paradox there that Jesus doesn't care about Democrat or Republican, red or blue. The politics of Jesus could care less. But the politics of Jesus invite us and compel us to love our neighbor in a way that's always more challenging, that has political ramifications. They won't fit into the categories of our systems, but there are political implications of his teachings. Jesus is cosmic, yet personal. This figure that is so beyond, right? And John says, in the beginning was the Word of Jesus, and the Word was with God. There's a sense that Jesus is eternal and beyond everything. The biggest thing you can think of in the universe is gigantic, incomprehensibly huge, but somehow intimately personal and known like a friend. And finally, of the 40 that I had to narrow down to 15, Jesus is hope that death is not the last word. An emphatic statement into our reality, a claim, an absurd claim that death is not the end, that the empty tomb is the end, and that Jesus invites us into that life somehow mystically forever, that even as our bodies fail, the love of God will continue forever. And he invites us into that current of love into eternity. So for you, there's probably deeply personal ways you say, why Jesus? Because Jesus is all these things to me. So I want to ask some questions and do so by talking about one of Jesus' followers. One of the more prominent, famous followers of Jesus in the last century, this wonderful human being, Mother Teresa. I love her story. If anybody's read her biographies, and even more recently in the last few years, her diaries, where she has legitimate doubts and questions about God, I am drawn to that because it reveals the humanity and the tension of what it means to be a person of faith. I wonder, if we were to ask Mother Teresa, why are you a Christian? I've been playing with this, like imagining talking to Mother Teresa all week. What would it be like? Well, what would she say? And I don't know, right? To be speculation. But I have a hunch that she'd say, I don't know, but my life is different, and that's enough. I don't know fully, but if it wasn't for Jesus, I wouldn't have gone to Calcutta and gave my life away. I wouldn't have endured hardship and sickness and left relative comfort in Armenia to go to a place of poverty, to love people. And as she did, she saw Jesus in that context. One of my favorite quotes from Mother Teresa is this. Somebody asked her, why do you do all this? Essentially, why has your faith led you to action? Hard action. She says, well, whenever I meet somebody in need, it's really just Jesus in the most interesting disguise. And I love that framework because something in her heart has changed to the point where when she sees rags, as the world would describe it, somewhere in her spirit she actually knows that those are riches. That when she sees the destitute, the lowest caste, those suffering on the brink of death, somehow she sees God there. God on the margins, God in the mess, God in our brokenness. And there's something about her life that is like very life-giving to all of us. Like, she's different. She's not like everybody else. Why is she different? Jesus. That's it. Maybe you've asked the question like, what would my life be like if it hadn't been marked by Jesus in some way? You know, for me, it'd be very different. And I could say that most of the things that I value in my life, whether they're things that were hard or relationships that I cherish, somehow are rooted in this story being tangled up with my life. That if it wasn't for Jesus, X, Y, and Z wouldn't have happened. I certainly wouldn't be standing up here in this weird theater space talking about this person from a different culture that's 2,000 years old. Like, that's absurd. But it's real. And the only thing that made all that happen for me, the only way I can understand it is that I encountered Jesus. Jesus was real to me, both rationally and mystically. And I can't shake that. Like Maiva said, it's this thing that I can't deny, I won't let anybody take from me. Amidst all the flaws of Christianity, which the list is infinite, it seems, Jesus is still Jesus. Right? It was Gandhi who said, I'm down with Jesus, it's his followers that are crazy. And so, why Christian? Because underneath it is the story, the reality of Jesus that I think everybody's invited to. And as you engage that story, things change in your life. As you hang with Jesus, I think my experience has been in a real way as you give consent to God's Spirit to come into your own spirit, like what happens is you become more like Jesus over time, and things are changed. I've wondered a lot, like, about the disciples, those people that Jesus hung out with, his friends. They got a chance to see everything. Like, what if they hadn't have followed Jesus? Like, there's these stories in the Gospels where Jesus seems to walk up to them as they're fishing, and he says, hey, follow me. And there's a whole context to why they probably would follow him, but it's kind of a jarring story. Like, if I'm at work one day and somebody who's a religious teacher walks up and says, hey, like, come do this other thing, would I drop my entire life and follow him? I don't know. But they did. And as a result, their life was transformed. Think about the things that they got to see because they followed this rabbi. They saw the blind given sight, the lame walk, the wounded healed, the poor empowered, women treated with a provocative amount of dignity. They saw somebody walk on real water, not just Nike water. They saw a few loaves of bread feed twice as many people would show up at an A's game. They got to hang out with Jesus. They got to know the eternal question is, does God snore? Right? They slept in close proximity to Jesus as they were traveling. Have you ever wondered? Was Jesus, like all the idiosyncrasies, the mannerisms of God incarnate, like signifying that these things that we do are actually somehow sacred, that God redeems flesh, that our bodies are beautiful gifts of God. They're not spiritual, they're deeply spiritual. The physical is. They got to see all this stuff. And so if you're asking the disciples a question, why Jesus? I don't know if I have an answer, but I can tell you that they would definitely say, all I know is if I hadn't, my life would be totally different. And all these things I wouldn't have been exposed to. I wouldn't have been a participant in. And so for a lot of us, that's how we answer this question. Why? Because if it wasn't for Jesus, things would be so different. Maybe for some of us, we're not there. And that's okay. Like, keep hanging. I like to deconstruct the idea of what it means to be a Christian. I have probably heretical views, according to a lot of more traditional Christian institutions, I would say, on how I describe what a Christian is. Because I don't think it's membership in a religion. I don't think it's checking a box of beliefs. I think it has to do with these two words. Gravity and proximity is ways that help me understand it. What it means to be a Christian is somebody who's caught in the gravity in the orbit of Jesus' story and Jesus' reality. Like the moon to the earth, spinning around as that thing is moving through time. What does it mean to be a Christian? A Christian is those who are caught in the orbit of Jesus. Whether they call themselves that or not, I don't know if that's important. Maybe it is. But something in my spirit tells me, no, it's the people who are caught in the orbit of Jesus. And that could be a very expansive way to describe it. The second word, proximity. It's not just orbit, because there are planets that are spinning way far out there. They're still caught in the orbit, and maybe that is a parallel to Jesus. But those who are close in proximity, who spin around, maybe they're going the wrong direction, but they're brought back to it. Have you hung with those people? Like, they start to have the aroma, like, of having spent time with Jesus. Like, have you ever met somebody that your grandparent has been friends with their whole life? And then you're like, oh, you totally, you know grandma. Or you watch, like, partners start to act alike over time, start to say certain things and start to laugh similar. Like, it's kind of creepy often. I do it. I've watched partners, like, it's like, oh, you guys have been in the same gravity and proximity over a long time. There's intentionality there, there's consent there, there's letting it in. But that's, to me, what a Christian is. Somebody who's caught in the orbit of God incarnate, with questions, with faults, sure. But maybe you don't have to believe everything right, but something about the story is haunting you in the best of ways. And you're caught in the orbit, and as you get closer, you start to become more like that. I think that's what we see in the Gospels, actually. People who are called to follow Jesus. They didn't believe the Apostles' Creed yet because it hadn't been written. They were just following this guy. The Bible hadn't been compiled yet. No, they were just caught in the orbit, in proximity. They're drawn by the gravity of this story, which I think is a story that actually unites us all. So I want to close with some questions to reflect on. We're going to have some space for deeper reflection too. The band's going to come up in just a minute and lead us in some song. There's also papers around. If you'd like to process these questions, you can just grab one and write down a response as a way to kind of reflect or journal this. But here's some questions to think about. Oh yeah, and there's one other thing we're going to do today. We're going to try to start implementing this a little bit more frequently. But there's going to be a few people over by those chairs against that wall who are going to be there praying for anybody. Or if you need to talk to somebody, they'll be over there. And we'll just be able to listen to whatever you need to let off your heart, to whatever you want to ask for prayer for. And maybe it's one of these questions. So these are the questions to close with. Who is Jesus to you? I shared my list, which I can go on and on. Maybe he's a liberator. Maybe Jesus is your friend, a healer, a protector. Maybe somebody you have questions about. Who is Jesus to you? Second question is, how would my life be different if Jesus hadn't been Jesus? And that's a question that I think all of us can reflect on, whether we identify as Christian or not. I think we've all been caught somehow in the orbit of this story. And then thirdly, if you could say one thing to Jesus, what would it be? If you could encounter him, what would you ask? Would you just give a hug? Would you say thank you? What would you say? in this space is to open up our spirits in somewhat of a contemplative way, considering this person underneath the Christian story that has changed history, transformed so many of our lives, and that I think somehow we're all in the orbit of. As the band comes up, we close in prayer. As also, in this time, we'll invite parents to go get their kids to bring back for the last couple songs as well. Would you pray with me as we step into a time of a little bit of reflection as the band comes up? God, thank you for this community and the incredible human beings that we get to hang with and walk through life together with. We give you Oak Life and the needs of this church, but more importantly this morning, Lord, maybe more on my heart is that you would speak to us, that we would all at the very least today start asking some of these questions and somehow find you there. And whether we have it all cleared up or not, I don't think you hold back your love from us or your comfort, even if it's just a feeling deep inside of us that you're there. I pray that, God, we would reflect Jesus better. That the ways we've messed up this story, made it about us, God, would you change us? Would you draw us back to who you are? Love embodied, sacrificial love of enemy, forgiveness for all, grace for the outsider, a cosmic feast that never ends. This is what you invite us to, and this is the good news of Jesus. Would that be good news for us this morning, Lord? Praise in Christ's name. Amen.
Precious is my Savior's blood. Beauty of heaven wrapped in my shame. The image of love upon that's frame. Having my heart was worth the pain. What joy could you see beyond the grave? Love found my soul worth dying for. Wonderful, how glorious, my Savior's done, victorious, my chains are gone, my debt is paid. see Jesus. And from death to life I will sing your praise, the wonders of your. When I see that cross, I see freedom. When I see that grave, I'll see Jesus. From death to life I will sing your praise, the wonder of your. When I see that cross, I see freedom. When I see that grave, I see Jesus. From death to life I will sing your praise, the wonder of your grace. How my soul will sing your praise, in the wonders of your grace. How my soul will sing your praise. How wonderful, how glorious, my Savior's scars, victorious. My chains are gone, my debt is paid. Death to life, grace to grace. I hear the Savior say, thy strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Come on, rise. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. And all God's people say, amen. Feel free to be seated.
Wonderful, thank you guys. Okay, so we've reached the part of the of our Sunday where we have community announcements. So I open up the floor to anybody that wants to share anything for about 30 seconds. You can invite someone to lunch or I don't know, something you have going on. Yes, Leslie.
All right, so the hiking group starting up next week. We're going to a pumpkin patch. Okay, so that's going to be our kickoff. If you're interested in joining, please come talk to me.
All right. Yes.
I'm Josh.
Hey, Josh.
Hi. I'm learning Mandarin Chinese, and I found a meetup group that meets on Saturdays at 2 o'clock. So if anyone speaks Mandarin, wants to like have lunch with me, anything, want to be my friend, that'd be great.
Thank you, Josh. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dave. We're doing another bike ride not this coming Saturday, but the next Saturday on the 26th. We're gonna meet at IKEA at 9. We're gonna bike across the Bay Bridge. Really fun ride. We're gonna get some brunch when we're over on the island and have a good time.
Cool. Thanks, Dave. Hey.
Hi, my name is Kevin, and next Saturday I'm trying to get a group of people to go to comedy night at It's Your Move next Saturday night. Details are on Facebook, but it's at a game store in Berkeley called District of Games.
I think it's in Oakland.
Oh, whatever.
I live nearby. So
It's an
I'm not-
East Bay.
Party at your house after then?
basically, yeah. Okay, anybody else? All right, okay. Okay, so why don't you join me in reciting the benediction? You stand, you can. Okay, God of love, even though our religion has often fallen short, may we still find you holding us. Help us to be people of redeeming faith and reconciling lives, giving and receiving your love in Christ. In your presence, may our doubts be welcomed, may our scars find healing, may our mistakes be forgiven. Be with us now as we go forth to love and serve the world. Amen.
There's been some where it's like, it gets like out of rhythm. Like, you start in the center, it's over here. What's up, man? How's it going?
Good. Leslie's. What's the deal with the pumpkin patch?
I know, right?
I want to go to pumpkin patch.
Okay, good. Okay.
Come down. I'll wait till you come down.
Yes. A lot of things for you. Okay.